Hi, this is Paula Casson from ParentSquare. Thanks for joining us today. It's just turned 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and so we're going to get started. Thanks for joining this session today on virtual simulations for remote professional development in K-12. So let me just introduce to you Ken Spero and talk for 1 minute just about how this hour will go. And then I'm going to hand over to Ken. So we're in GoToWebinar, and we'll be using polls, and we're going to be using the Q&A features as part of the live simulation part of what we do. So we will want your participation as the simulation goes on. And Ken's going to give us an overview of what are learning simulations, why would you do them? I think they're really useful both for professional development and for remote learning with students. But you know, we'll give you enough to see what you think about those two use cases. And Ken's the CEO of Ed Leadership Sims, and they work with higher ed and K-12 and do a lot of professional development to really get those leadership skills going. They have simulation scenarios for all sorts of situations, and we wanted you to come and speak to our audience because right now with the pandemic, it's just there's so many critical decisions that people have to make, and certainly communications and dealing with lots of stakeholders is at the heart of it, which is what our platform helps schools do. So I'll stop and let me hand over to you. Oh yes, can you back up one slide? There's one thing I forgot to mention, which was the hashtag. So, the hashtag is not on here. I will put that into the Q&A for you. We have a hashtag on Twitter, and we'll be sort of live tweeting some of the highlights of this, and the hashtag is EdSimsPS, PS for ParentSquare, EdSimsPS. So if you're a Twitter user and you like to sort of save your outtakes, please use that hashtag, and if you go and look up that hashtag right now, you'll see a couple of things there to start us off. Okay, and with that, thanks a lot. Ken, I'm going to hand over the hour to you.
Thank you, Paula, very much, and welcome everyone. I will add that welcome to Paula's. It is great to have you here, and hope that you are all well and your families are well and you're managing in this complicated and making the best of it, as we all are. So real quickly, as Paula mentioned, I'm the CEO, co-founder of a company called Ed Leadership Sims, and I'm going to spend some time talking a little bit more about the concept and how it can be applied. And also, we'll show you one. We've actually been working on a leading in a pandemic simulation, and we'll get to that towards the latter part of the hour. During the course of the time, please feel free to send in questions. We'll get to them as we can, and certainly those that we don't answer during the course of the session, we will respond to afterwards. So I'd like to start out, and actually, if you can go into the questions area, I'd like to ask you to respond to something, if you would. I'd like you to fill in the blank for me. Blank is the best teacher. How would you fill that in? And I'm not referring to a person. If you could please, in the question area, please fill in the blank. Blank is the best teacher. How would you fill in that phrase? Thank you, Alex. So thank you. We've gotten a few responses, and they continue to roll in, and as expected, right? Experience is the best teacher, or life, right? But I would suggest that life and experience would be kind of synonymous conceptually in terms of what the intent is. And so we know that experience is the best teacher. And so what we do at Leadership Sims is really to, in essence, manufacture experience in a scalable way. We use computer-based components. And again, we'll talk more about that because it's not the only way to do it. But that's really what this is all about. It's this idea of being able to, in essence, deploy experience in a scalable way, because as we all know, the school of hard knocks if you'll forgive the language, kind of sucks. And so the opportunity to create a safe space where we can actually learn from experience is what we're all about. Now we know, so let me ask you another question. And this would be a longer answer, so I'm not sure that we'll take the time to do that, but by all means, if you do have a thought on this, I'd love to see it. So we know that simulations are utilized in other high stakes arenas, right? We know that they're in the military, they're in certainly aircraft, in the Air Force, but also in other aviation. We know that they're used in healthcare. So, schools, K-12 is a pretty high stakes arena, right? These decisions are pretty complicated. If in fact, we know that experience is the best teacher, you've all agreed to that, and I'm guessing if we asked another 100 people, we'd get approximately 100 answers along the same lines. So if experience is the best teacher, simulations approximate experience, then why isn't everybody simulating? And I can tell you that this is a question that I've had for years, actually. I've been doing this for quite some time. I've been doing this for over 30 years. And it's a question that I just don't understand. Because, if A plus B, all those things, if we just do the math, right, we should actually be seeing that everybody is simulating. So why is it that we're not? So what I would suggest to you is that in the years that I've had looking at this and thinking about this, is that, and simply observing, is that in the learning space broadly, what's happened is that instruction and learning have become synonymous. And we tend to look at everything when it comes to learning through an instructional lens. Now, what does that mean? So when we think about how we learn from instruction and how we learn from experience, I would suggest there's two different learning models at play. When we teach, right, I'm going to teach you what you need to know, right? I can tell you this is the information you need to have. This is the concepts that you need to understand. This is the framework you're supposed to follow in order to do this successfully, right? And when it comes to even things like quote unquote experiential learning, ironically, we actually see a lot of focus on best practices or opportunities to demonstrate mastery. Well, that's fine for instruction, but how do we learn from experience? Do we learn from experience by getting it right? So I'm going to fill in the blank myself there. No, right? Our best learning opportunities and experience come from making mistakes, come from failing. So whereas I wouldn't teach you to fail, I would be designing experiences to actually encourage you to possibly fail constructively, right? So we can actually, not to promote bad practice, obviously, but to have an opportunity to actually put your hand on the stove, and if it gets burned, okay, then we can think about why that happened, and we experientially learn not to put our hands on a stove if we haven't checked it first, right? So how do we have that? How do we create that opportunity in order to do that? That's what I call experience design. It's an alternative, complementary approach to designing lessons in which when we need to teach, we teach. When it's time to provide experience, we design in an experience-driven manner. And it's not to say one is more important than the other. They're both important. I would refer to this as blended learning, right? Because you can do this obviously from a technological perspective, but it's important to think about when we need to teach, we teach. When we need experience, we design experiences, and the two actually work very well together. Because when you need to know stuff, and then you need to apply stuff and see what happens when it doesn't present in that neat, orderly way, but when it's murky, when it's muddy, when it presents out of order or even in a hidden way, and we have to navigate our way through it. Now, so as I mentioned, I've been doing this for over 30 years, simulations, only more recently in the K-12 arena. And I would suggest to you that having worked with staff from companies or organizations around the world at many different levels, that the role of teachers and leaders in schools and frankly other staff members are some of the most complex jobs that are out there. And I say that with utmost respect. The fact is that from a high stakes perspective, the stakes are very, very high because we're dealing with our kids, our futures, their futures. And the decisions are inherently complicated and the stakes are very high. And on top of that, it's exacerbated by groups of stakeholders whose demands are often totally exclusive of each other, so that there is absolutely no way to satisfy all the constituents in decision making. And so from the standpoint of being able to make good decisions, I would suggest to you that in this role, the two of the key skills required from an expertise perspective in terms of navigating positions in this space are going to be, on the one hand, the ability to exercise good judgment, right? We need to make the best decision we can, be thoughtful, and do the best we can. But on the other hand, we need to be resilient, because the fact is that no matter how good you think your decision is, chances are there's going to be one, two, three, many stakeholders who will not agree, right? When we're dealing in schools, when we're dealing with parents, for instance, and I am a parent, I've recently become a grandparent, we of course are totally focused on our own kids, as we should be. In a school building, in a classroom, you're going to need to be focused on the needs of many children. In a school building, in a district, et cetera, let alone the other stakeholders, the communities, the other staff members, other things that are at play, where each person is looking at it, each constituency is looking at things differently. So these are two key skills that are required. And the fact is, when you think about them, neither one of them, neither judgment nor resilience, can be taught. We can't teach them. I can't teach you judgment. The only way we can get better at them is through experience. And again, the school of hard knocks is not pleasant, as we all know. And so how do we, in fact, in a scalable way, allow for this kind of opportunity, no matter what target audience you're focused on, right? You could be focusing on leaders, as we are currently, focusing on teachers, staff members. This could be for parents. This could be for students. Anybody who's involved in a contextual type of situation where we need to think our way through it, where it's not just that I can give you this 6 steps, here, follow these down, and you'll get it right. That's where judgment is required. That's where resilience is going to be beneficial, because it's often not the decision itself that is going to hurt us, but it's the blowback. Because one of the things we know is that there's always blowback. So as we think about this idea of simulation, you know, we've come across, there were a couple of quotes on the previous page. We, you know, as we sail through life, don't avoid rough waters, sail on, because calm waters don't make a skillful sailor, right? There's a wonderful metaphor. I'm not a sailor, but I've certainly been on the water. And you know that when you're teaching, if I teach you only on calm waters, you know, and you, again, metaphorically, then when it comes to being rough waters, we're going to hesitate, we're going to freeze, we're going to make knee-jerk decisions that are maybe not so thoughtful. And look, you know, as we're all dealing with this pandemic, no matter where one stands, the fact is there was no script to follow. People were making decisions based on who knows what, right? You're trying to extrapolate from other experiences to apply here, or just being totally stressed out and needing to make a choice. And so we can't train for this specifically, but there is crisis opportunities where we could have possibly be focusing on things like that. So when we think about this idea of simulation, and we think about the underpinnings, because some of the challenges are really that this helps to address this idea of experience design, is really a human issue. This was a project I came across that I found fascinating. It's called the Millennium Project, and they looked at the identifying 15 global challenges facing humanity, right? Pretty heady stuff. Be interesting to see what they come up with after the current situation. But, you know, if you look at these, when you look around the globe, you begin to see the things you'd expect to see that are the global challenges facing humanity. But as you continue to look around the globe and you see number 9 there at the bottom, that's a, you know, on first blush, maybe a head scratcher. Our capacity to decide. They identified that our ability, that people's ability to make decisions is a global challenge facing humanity. And I found that fascinating. Now, the fact is that that is actually, when you unpack that just a little bit, it's nowhere more clear than in schools. When you think about, on the one hand, you've got data, and now there's so much data that it's difficult to know which data are important. And even if you can identify which are, then what do you do with them? And then on the other opposite extreme, you've got everybody in a school building is probably about a half a step away from being a headline in the news. That's pretty scary stuff. And so how do you navigate? How do you make decisions in that context when, you know, you don't know? It's analysis paralysis on the one hand, and really, you know, fear of failure on the other. So how do you make, so actually just practicing making decisions, the opportunity to do that in a safe place can actually be very, very helpful. Now, this is a deep slide, so I'm going to give you a moment to process it. Now, sadly, I cannot see if any of you chuckled or laughed at this, so I'm hoping that you did. Let me see if any of you want to give me a smiley face or something in the, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Hopefully you find this a little bit compelling, but the idea that at the end of the day, as human beings, we are mindless, habit-forming creatures as humans. Critical thinking is really not a natural skill. We have to work at it, and we have to practice at it, because we are very focused on, as you know, right? We're very interested in getting good at something so that it becomes a habit and we can stop thinking about it. You know, driving, for instance, right? You wouldn't want to be 100% deliberate every time as you did when you were learning how to drive, right? You like certain things, not, you don't want to be mindless completely, but we want to get good at things so that we can, you know, not have to waste, as it were, a lot of brain energy on doing that, right? So critical thinking is really important, and being able to practice that on the one hand, or to suffer consequences, but in a safe place where we didn't exhibit mindful thinking, where we were actually thoughtless or mindless about making decisions. We just decided to do it because that's what we've always done it, or we did it because that's what we did it last time, right? It's usually going to be helpful to be at least a little bit thoughtful. If we can get that pause into before you make the decision, just check yourself. That can be a very powerful thing. So again, having an opportunity, designing experiences so that this can actually be practiced is important. One of the other things I wanted to point out is this idea of, I'm sure you've all come across, or many of you come across, this idea of 21st century learning. And these are the necessary skills that are required for students, but frankly, adults. These are lifelong learning skills, and these are things that we need to be good at, right? These have been identified, and this is one of the models. This is the model that's put out by the World Economic Forum. I'm sure you've probably seen. But again, they all capture approximately similar, you know, they do similar things. What I found fascinating about this breakdown of these 16 skill sets is that when you think about how are we going to get people to be good at these things, that the only set of skills that we can really teach are the purple ones. We try to teach literacy, numeracy, scientific literacy, ICT literacy, financial literacy, cultural and civic literacy, right? Those are the kinds of things that we need to share information. We teach you what you need to know, how to do it, etc. The other two columns, right, the competencies and the character qualities, when you look at them, you can't teach any of those, right? Really, the only thing we can do to get better at, I can tell you about them, but the only way to get it better at them is going to be experience. And so the beauty of this kind of modality, of this kind of approach, and I would encompass project-based learning as part of this, right? This is all focused on experience, is these skills happen organically when you're engaged in them. So the learning process is happening organically. You can call it out, but we're exhibiting these things without even having to be told, or we're watching others do it without. And so the opportunity to use a modality that allows you to blend where we need to teach, we teach, but when we need to allow for the experience that it can happen, that's where experience design is all about. And you can think of this as automated, well, I'll show you an automated one, but kind of it's case studies to the next level, right? Case studies are inherently static, right? They get up to a point and then you discuss it. So case studies can be very, very powerful, but they're limited in that way, where we're looking at something that actually captures right thing, not necessarily what you would do. And we want to get at the what you would do thing, because that's where the mistakes can be made. That's where the opportunity to you wield that virtual 2x4 and whack folks between the eyes and say, that was probably not the most thoughtful choice you could have made, and here's and experience the consequences of doing that. That's where the opportunity is to do this kind of modality. So when you think about this, to give you the frame for this, what experience design is really all about, what the focus is going to be on, whereas we design instruction around specific standards, competencies, learning objectives, we focus on particulars that I need you to know, or that you need to know. Experience is going to focus on actually using that information collectively to make decisions, or to problem solve, or to collaborate, because it's important for us to realize, it's important for our students at whatever level to realize that you are not alone, right? Never will you be alone. And it's important, obviously, you can't control for that, but the opportunity to be thinking about, how do I get insight from my friend, my peer, my direct reports, my boss, whoever's around you, but the opportunity to talk it through, the opportunity to, I've always enjoyed my conversations with ParentSquare in terms of the focus on communication. And the important thing that is, I may not have the answers. I have an answer, probably, or maybe not, but I definitely know that if I talk it through, it'll get better, because either I come up with a better answer, or I can enhance what I wanted to do already, or even stop myself from doing something that could actually have negative consequences that I didn't anticipate. And we do that through the opportunity to exhibit the core abilities of critical systems and creative thinking. Just being able to think out of the box, and maybe out of our own box, or out of the box of the building, or out of the box of the district, or the state, or whatever the case may be, the opportunity to engage in alternative ways of thinking. So coming down to what we do at Leadership Sims, our focus has been on leadership specifically. Our starting point in trying to help in schools is that it begins with leadership. Yes, we do know that that teachers have the greatest effect on students, but in order to keep teachers in the building, we think that leadership is important, right? So that teachers can actually do their thing and be encouraged to continue to do it, and enable others to do it as well. And really, change is required in leadership in some level, whether it's to protect the change, whether it's to know when to get out of the way, or actually vision it. But we designed a library. We've taken this idea of experiences that are out in the field, put them in a box, so that people can actually have these experiences in a risk-free environment where you're making decisions, where you're experiencing consequences of your choices on an evolving timeline, as it were, and then ultimately have the opportunity for reflection. So to me, that's really, as you think about designing, maybe you've got some content in your head, maybe you're thinking about, God, I've got this lesson, I'd really like to engage my students. So what are the things that are taking place in a sim? What it boils down to is 5 things. The first is the context, or the story. One of the things that is, I don't think I'd be speaking out of turn to say, I think the most powerful tool for engagement is going to be stories, right? As human beings, another aspect is that we are engaged, we love stories. We can't help it, and this is something of any age, right? Every age is engaged by stories. And not only do we are we engaged by stories, it's organic, it's chemical even. I mean, there's research out there of what happens in the brain when we're engaged in stories, so we can't even help it. But we also like to tell stories, right? This goes back in history, how people, family stories, this is how things were communicated from generation to generation, is we tell stories. And so we create an environment, we create a realistic context that we see ourselves in, a narrative that we can relate to, that's recognizable. That's the first step. The second step is then, in that context, I need to have to exercise judgment. I need to make decisions. I need to have to make choices. And this doesn't need to be AI, doesn't need to go, there's obviously degrees to which you can do this, but we focus on the opportunity to exercise judgment, to actually have to engage in decision making, and ideally collaboratively. The next thing is, it's important to allow for the experience of the consequences. If you make a decision that is well thought out, that you consider the issues, and again, I'll put all kinds of factors in there, then you get to deal with the consequence. So dealing with the positives, but also opportunities to deal with the negatives, right? Because again, we learn from making mistakes. So make the mistake here, because making a mistake for real is going to be very complicated, right? So things like dealing with a student suicide. God forbid anybody should have experience with that. But this is the kind of thing where you're never going to get it right. The only way we're going to get better at it is through experience. But God forbid anybody has a lot of experience with that. So how do we navigate that? Or dealing with transgender students. This is something that's new, but the damage that can be done is significant. So how do we mitigate? How do we prepare people to deal with these kinds of scenarios? That's what the simulations are about. And then ultimately to get feedback, right? We do want, in order to, if we don't have the opportunity for reflection, that learning can be lost. And so we do need to bake in that opportunity. And if this can be done in groups, the group, the team, the collaboration that's modeled just tremendously powerful. The peer-to-peer learning that can happen, again, with any level of students, can be incredibly engaging and also very, very powerful. And that, in essence, is what we look at as the opportunity to do experience design around whatever topic you might come up with. Anything that, again, is contextual in nature, where either there may be a recipe to follow, but it's not agreed upon by all stakeholders, or even when doing it, you need to deal with, you have to thicken your skin so that you can deal with the stakeholders, because it's all, but in a hearty way. So how do you deal with that, etc. Okay, so I will really quickly, are there any questions that I need to respond to that people have? So I'm sorry that obviously in this modality, it's very easy to just continue talking.
I don't see any questions, Ken.
Okay, excellent. So let's play a sim. All right, so is everybody seeing my screen? You are, okay. So what we have done, the current on leadership. So we're going to play kind of leading in a pandemic simulation. This is a draft. So it's not a completed sim, because obviously this is something we just started working on recently. And one of the things that was quite, if one were to be able to hover up, okay, and think of this objectively, even though we're all in it and experiencing pain and stress and fear throughout it, is that the decision making in this context have been, well, obviously very, very complicated, and the trade-offs that exist in the decisions are extremely stark, right? When we're thinking about what's going on in our school buildings, the challenge of closing buildings, the challenge of thinking about how we're going to continue to teach kids, how are we going to care for these children that are now going to be in their homes, from the standpoint of what we can do educationally, for those kids they're relying on the schools for their meals during the course of the day, that there were some very, very stark decisions that health, cost, whatever it is, that needed to be examined as we navigated this challenge. And it was clear these are not one and done decisions, right? Because whatever decision you made, then you had to deal with the flow of continue. We needed to get this right, and now we're going to need to get what comes next right. So this is very complicated. And so that, for us, for me, I'm a carpenter with a hammer in my hand, and everything looks like a simulation. So this sounded like a great simulation opportunity. So we engaged, and all of the simulations that we do are done in concert with people who are having experiences that can be simulated. So we partnered with Gwinnett County Public Schools in Georgia, who is a big client of ours, and the University of West Alabama as well. And they actually have a program specifically focused on leadership for rural schools. And we made the connection that, with the distributed aspect of now putting everybody home, everybody's kind of rural from that perspective, even though it goes beyond that with the kids being in their homes. but thought that maybe there's some opportunities to provoke interesting opportunities for conversation around decision making in this context. So that's how it came to be. And again, this is one version, so I'm not promoting the idea that in order to do experience design, this is the way it needs to look. You don't need technology. You don't necessarily need, you can do these things with the thought process of, again, engaging in the opportunity to experience negative consequences. That's the important thing, right? That we're designing this for mistakes. We're designing for failure in mind. And there's a lot of literature that's been coming out, and I'm sure many of you have seen a lot of literature that's about engaging with children, that, playtime is an opportunity. That's how kids learn, right? As children, we learn a lot from those mistakes, those missteps, we learn very quickly what not to do or what way not to do it. Not always as well as we should. Kids don't always learn as we'd like them to, because that critical thinking thing does take time to fully evolve. If it ever completely evolves, as we know in ourselves, it's a lifelong activity. But the opportunity to engage, this is, again, one manifestation. So when you think about this, this is what we'll engage in. We're going to be the leader of a building, which we'll get to in just a second. There is a cast of characters, which I'll show you, and some other things, that non-linear things that are going to transpire that we're going to have to contend with, okay? So one thing that's important when we design Sims is that there's no back button. Because like in life, when you make decisions, even when you make mistakes, what happens, right? Sometimes it's complicated, right? But you move on. And we don't want to provide mulligans here, because the opportunity for learning, again, is not just with, as different than like case studies, which are a little bit more static. We want to make sure what we're covering is a timeline. So you're going to actually make decisions that can have an effect downstream, but we also don't want to take the sting away. We want you to have to deal with it, because that's instructive. It's not about having the experience. It's about having an experience, because every experience we have is potentially valuable. In this instance, because we want you to get some insights, and we thought that some of the social emotional issues that are going on in the decision making are going to be pretty complicated, we wanted to include a bit of what we call a dashboard, where we're giving you insight in terms of the stress levels of students, parents, and the faculty and staff. And this is broad, and we are aggregating here clearly. But the interesting thing is that, as you might expect, they're not always going to track, right? Students or parents may not track, and certainly not faculty. Things that faculty find stressful may not necessarily get out to the parents or down to the students. So we wanted to provide that insight. So that's one of the methods of opportunities for reflection, but also inputs into the decision-making process. So you may not always have this in real life, but we should probably try to be sensitized to it in terms of the way people are going. So the model we kind of came up with, we kind of tried to stay content agnostic, but we do want to, the beauty of this kind of modality is really to demonstrate those trade-offs, right? Anything that's quote unquote a problem of practice, right? Anything that's a challenge, I would suggest to you is a challenge. And if you think about the challenges you experience in your lives, that often it's related to the trade-offs that are inherent in the decision, right? Sometimes they're obvious, right? I really want this issue, it will satisfy me. I want to buy this thing, but it comes at a cost, right? So that's an easy trade-off, right? The value of what I would get versus the cost to purchase it. Those are easy trade-offs. Well, sometimes we make trade-offs that I want to do something for this student that's sitting here in front of me, but it may not go as well with other students. What about it? Or I may do this, but my colleague down the hall may have different experiences and need to do different things. Or the parents may not appreciate, or again, whatever the case may be, there are trade-offs that are at play. So we want to demonstrate those trade-offs. So these are manifestations of what some of those trade-offs are. And by the way, I will say this is a work in progress. And so we will make, if you're interested, we'll give you our contact information to take a deeper look at, or even to potentially give us some feedback on. It's something that will be an opportunity as well, because our other scenarios for that matter, because we're always looking to enhance the opportunity, both in terms of from a leadership perspective, but we're actually looking to now do simulations for teachers as well as having discussions with folks like ParentSquare to think about other audiences as well, including parents. So the situation, you're in your third year as a principal at Oakwood Elementary School. This is a K-5 school, it's in a geographically large district, and demographics cover a broad range of race, ethnicity, and SES. The school year is nearing completion and you're approaching the spring break. Recently, the news of an unknown illness has been receiving more press time, and you sense that its growing significance may soon impact schools. It has yet to impact your community, but several metropolitan areas have begun reporting cases. Yesterday, a related death was reported, and there is growing. Not sure if you heard that knock, little audio visual there, but visit from Mr. Newman. So you hear a timid knock on your door. Mr. Newman, your newest kindergarten teacher, pokes his head in the door. Do you have a minute? I have a brother who lives upstate. I received a call from him late last evening, and he's been admitted to the regional hospital with some weird lung problems. I just got off the phone with the hospital, and they say his condition is serious. I need to leave immediately. Can we combine my students with Miss Forrest's class for the next few days? You see the concern in his eyes and tell him to go, reassuring him. We get an email from the superintendent, which we feel necessary to take a look at real quickly. This is to inform you that due to the growing numbers of COVID-19 cases, we are considering closing schools. We need each of you to respond with a prioritized list of impacts this contemplated action will have in each of your schools. There are rumors that actions are being considered at the state level, so time is limited for us to consider impacts and determine strategies moving forward. So we really had finished we got to get the timing right. We had finished our conversation with Mr. Newman. Of course, we'll support his needs to go visit his brother, but now we've got to respond to the issue from the superintendent. Okay, so we'll make the necessary arrangements. So now we get to our first decision point. And so as you think about this, so you see the big picture and sense that the requested list is just the beginning. You feel a need to move quickly to establish a comprehensive response to this looming situation, right? You're the principal in this building. You obviously have got these your constituents, people in the building who are already beginning to hear about this, students, and there may be trickle down parents. So you feel this need to respond. So what will you do? Now we've added in each of these, and we'll review the choices in a moment. The timestamp at the end of them is shows trade-offs. We can pick the thing that we think might be best, but it's important to know that it comes at a cost. That everything we do, right, takes time, and that's one of our precious commodities is time, and we should be thoughtful about how we spend it. And it's not to say we shouldn't spend it, because clearly we need to, but it's something that maybe ought to be thought about when we do this. So what we're going to do is just to kind of walk you through the process here. We're going to make a decision. I'm going to launch a poll as you think. And we're going to make a decision based on, each of you will make a decision, and then we'll vote on which one we may proceed with. But we're going to actually engage in a little bit of conversation about what's going on. Why would you want to do this? Because I'm guessing that in the audience that we have, we're not all going to say the same thing, right? Because everybody has different experiences with this, and many of these choices may actually be important, but you can't do them all at the same time. So the question is, what would you do first? So the choices are requested impact list that the superintendent asked for. Let's just get right on that. Or the district is obviously on top of the situation, so let's wait for further guidance. You know, this is maybe it's a little still above our pay grade. Let's let the district worry about it, and let's manage our, because while this is going on, you still have your day job, right? This is the day-to-day is still going on. Or three, this is important. Begin developing contingency plans, right? Let's get right on this, and it's going to take a little bit more time. Or four, let's give this some thought before responding. Let's do a risk analysis. Let's engage in some thoughtful ways of approaching this. Think about before getting into the list. Or we can create an emergency response team. Let's get the team together and let's not do this alone. We need to get input from others. Actually, I should expand these so everybody can see them. We need to get the emergency response team together, but obviously it takes time to assemble a team. Or we'll call an emergency meeting of faculty and staff and get their input from the emergent perspective. So I want you to think about this for a minute. Take out a pen and a paper, if you wouldn't mind, or if you have one handy, and jot down which of these choices, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, you would choose if you were doing this on your own. Okay, hopefully everybody has had a chance to do that. Now, unfortunately, with the limitations in GoToWebinar, we can only put 5 options into the poll. So when you see the poll, you'll notice that number 3 is not there. So if you wanted to do 3, I'd actually like you to put it into the question arena, because I don't want to, thoughts are important and your input is important, so please do that. But in the meantime, if you could check in, pick your choice that you went for. Okay, so we're seeing some differentiation in the choices. Okay, great. All right, so at least 4 of the choices are being selected, so that's great. So we see differences of opinion. So I'm going to give this another 10 seconds, and then I'm going to close the poll. Okay, so everybody hopefully has voted who is going to vote. So we'll close that. I would like to ask is, so I'm going to share the poll, given that this is the first one, okay? And we can see that we actually have a 3-way tie. And I did want to check, let me just check the questions and see how many people did folks choose number 3. So obviously, sometimes one of the things we do with simulation is that if there's an obvious, something that you would really do, often we don't include it. Why? Well, because it's obvious. And that's the whole goal here is critical thinking. And so we try not to include the obvious choices. So when we look at this, we see that we have a 3-way tie for this is important, begin developing contingency plans, or give this some thought before analysis, or calling an emergency meeting of faculty and staff. So what we would do if we were actually in a smaller group or in a classroom, or where we're able to open up the audio, would actually be to have you discuss this and talk about, well, why for those of you who chose, or one of you who chose, this is the third option, why? What's important? What's compelling to you about doing a contingency plan? Or if we were to do the risk analysis, what's compelling about that? What were the trade-offs that you were thinking about? Why that would be your first step? Or calling the emergency meeting with faculty. So in this context, I'm wondering, what we could do is release another poll and have you vote again, or I can just choose one. So I think that for our purposes here, I'm going to choose for us so that we can, again, play a route. And again, if you want to see the other paths, I guess it's important that I point out, each of these decisions is pathed, right? There is consequences, whatever you do. So in terms of being able to experience what happens subsequently, that is happening. Each of these decisions is actually pathed. So if we, let's do contingency plans. We can just do that. And again, for those of you, I'm sorry at this point, but we will come back to it. And the opportunity here that we could have focused on in discussion, if we had a little bit more time, would be to understand and then see if people actually change their minds. Because once you start to have that opportunity to hear other perspectives, other opinions, other insights that were based on their experiences or things that they observed, you take your experience base, which we use for decision making, and expand it potentially exponentially. And so the opportunity addition to the challenge to actually think things through, can become extremely powerful. So let's just say, and for those of you, if it goes badly, you also earn the right to say, I told you so, right? So in terms of being able to have that opportunity, that's something that we can deal with as well. But let's say, okay, so we chose the opportunity to develop a contingency plan. You leverage your teaching experience and quickly begin putting together a plan for teachers to develop and begin delivery of online instruction. As you're anticipating that the closure is going to come, and so what are we going to do? You recognize that at some point, you'll need to get teachers involved, but your sense of urgency drives you to put a basic plan together first. Then you can get teachers' input to build on and modify this foundational plan. So already beginning to see that the stress levels, both amongst parents and faculty, are growing up. The students hasn't quite gone down to the students, but we're getting senses of increasing tension. One other thing to look at from a fee perspective is, there is that issue of time, so we're going to be able to track some of that and see if we are using more time than we actually have, but also budget, because these things are also at play whenever we're making decisions, and not being thoughtful about it may not affect your decisions, but you do anticipate there will be blowback relating to it. So before students begin to arrive for the day, you notify faculty and staff of an end of day meeting. So now we did end up with a staff meeting. At the end of a hectic day, you kick off the meeting with a brief overview of what you know, and then present your ideas and initial thoughts. Your plan is sketchy at best, but you hope it will be given them something to which they can react. However, they interpret your presentation as the plan, and it quickly comes under fire for not involving teachers or staff in its design. The entire faculty seems united in disliking your less than well thought out plan and your unilateral design strategy. It seems that any rationale you proffer is interpreted as excuses. Well, that didn't turn out the way you expected. So you can anticipate what might have happened had we gone with calling an emergency staff meeting. At the same time, or shortly thereafter, Mrs. Diop, one of your fourth grade teachers, comes to your office. I'm hearing rumors. I'm sure you're hearing them as well. Do you have plans for what this whole situation can turn ugly quickly? You realize that you're going to need to call another. At least one didn't turn out. The first one didn't turn out so well. You realize it must be done. Maybe the second time is a charm. So this is obviously going to continue. I'm going to, click through here. So we're going to formulate an emergency response team in the interest of time. We're going to do an emergency response team. We're going to assemble that. We're going to have individual meetings. Again, stress levels continue to be high. And we're going to get into the planning around how are we going to go about this process of enabling our school closure and still maintaining contact with our kids. Let's say we begin creating online lesson plans, and it continues. The one thing I'm going to jump ahead, and again, in the interest of time, because I don't want to run out of time, and we're going to get to household challenges. So as the closure comes out, the pressure on teachers, how are we going to manage what our educational goals are? They can't be the same as when they are in the building. An opportunity for reflection, an opportunity for kind of an open-ended, again, opportunity to capture some thinking that can be submitted as part of the process. And now we're getting a contact from a parent about we're going to have to work on that sound effect, but we just got an email from this parent. Our daughter Bernice is looking forward to kindergarten at Oakwood next fall. As you might expect, we're a little nervous about this new adventure and would like to arrange a time to come to school. It might help Bernice prepare for this big event. Is it possible to arrange a time perhaps before spring break? And we just got a text, which I didn't know if you heard it, but our phone went off. This is Brian Barkley. I'm just wondering if you received the email I sent several weeks ago about the kindergarten tour. So the opportunities the things that are coming up are beginning to, the issues get more complicated. And the issues it's not a linear type of issue. Things begin to pile up. And again, what I want to do is be able to show you just real quickly when we get to an end point, some of the feedback so we're getting the district and pandemonium begins, and the situation will continue to unfold. We got another text. So typically, again, as I mentioned, and again, I apologize. We got another email.
It's a good sim. This is Paula. Ken, and you let me go through it, and it's, you know, you can take a nice chunk of time just to really, yeah, I appreciate you trying to do it in like 20 minutes.
It really is just to give a sense of it. Again, the focus is not on the sim itself, but on the underlying thinking that goes into it, and even being able to capture something as complicated as this current situation where we don't have the answers. The beauty of the premise behind experience design is it's not about getting it right, which for teachers means that when you're designing these exercises, you know, when you convey a lesson and then you want to test the students to see if they got it right, experience is different, right? As you know from project-based learning, for those of you who are engaged in that, it's the activity that's important and what it allows for, what it provokes in what students are going through. And so really just wanted to show you that in a context that pretty much everybody can relate to now, of how we might design something. And again, even when we're still in the middle of it, to be able to capture the opportunity to provoke conversation about how we might deal with things, or how we might reflect upon what was done and think about it for what we might do next, or what we might do later. Or if we take this out of this context and using this, you know, God willing, when we're out of this next year, but other crises are going to come up, right? There will be natural disasters, there will be chemical spills, there will be, you know, God forbid, who knows what, that we need to be prepared for. And so here's some of the feedback elements that we provide, that the simulation can provide insight on things like, in addition to the time and the other social emotional issues, but there are social emotional issues at play, our ability to respond to change, our locus of control, encouraging others to lead, addressing challenges, and then there's the narrative, and then we provide narrative feedback as well. And again, I'm sorry for jumping through this quickly, but I did want to be able to show you, when we're dealing with this idea of experience, what the opportunity is in terms of formulating it and what you might do in terms of your lessons. Yes, I'm sorry, I keep talking over Paul.
You're not, I'm interrupting you. I'm seeing the clock go, but so this can be done remotely. It can be done solo, or it can, I can see a lot of potential for it to be done in a group, and you mentioned that sometimes you'll have a cohort running through a simulation together, and that's even
to be done as a, you know, leader-led session where you embed, as we're doing now. This could be done as a part of the PLC, or an in-service day where somebody, a principal or an AP is going to run it with their teams, or a teacher leader runs it as part of their PLC, or
you have done face-to-face in the past, which of course isn't.
Or when we're back to that, you can do it face-to-face. These are browser-based, so they can be done anywhere. And so the opportunity to deploy is totally up to you. So I will close out that opportunity there. You know, just to give you some insight into what others have said about this experience at various levels, both in school and also in higher ed, in ed leadership programs. And again, these will be shared subsequently, so you can see some of these, spend a little bit more time reading them if that's of interest, and clearly to be in touch with us relative to, look, I guess I mentioned, it doesn't take much to wind me up on the subject and in that carpenter status. So any thoughts that you have, any additional questions that you would want to explore, other sims you'd want to see, any one of those things, please feel free to be in touch. Look forward to your thoughts. And if you have questions now, I'm happy to respond.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you so much for that. Nice. You did a great job with a deep dive in such a short amount of time. We really wanted to have you along. We were going to do a school safety one on that topic, but of course that's just not relevant right now. So I really appreciate you sharing your latest iteration on the pandemic with us too. There's such potential both for PD and for, I think, I'd love to see more students doing this kind of thing. We'll see. If you want to just move to the next, yeah, go ahead.
One other thing is we are actually doing, we have a project going on in Iowa with, there's a professor who's working on a small grant. Actually, a group of students have come together to write their own security, for security from their perspective. A group of high school students are actually in the process of authoring an experience. But again, from their perspective, in terms of how you might deal with it. So this can actually really be done at any scale and at any level.
Fantastic. Great. And thank you so much. I think right now we'll leave it there for the sim part. And Ken, we've seen, especially with that simulation and the pandemic that we're in the middle of still, we've seen how important communications is. That's why I thought it was really a good tie-in for what we do with our communications platform. Schools have absolutely leveraged it for some of the tough decisions that they've been making over the last 2 months. We have insane, amazing examples. So I want to pass over to Valerie, my colleague, who's going to just do a short little What's ParentSquare and talk about what we've seen during the pandemic, how people have communicated out to their stakeholder groups and done the two-way communication and mass communication and what that sort of looks like. So if anyone is interested, please stick around for that. Let me move over, get you as the presenter, Valerie.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, and look out, we'll send all the resources to everyone after the fact. Now, can you stop sharing your, I think I can do it. Let me see. I'm just got to find the right, here we go.
Ken,
Valerie.
thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you guys.
You bet. So quick check with Paula, the organizer here. I'm looking at 12:57. Should I minimize this down to 5 minutes, Paula, or are we still good with 10? I can go
well,
either way.
We'll say 10. We'll say 10.
Okay.
Everyone is free to go around if you want to sort of learn a bit about how schools are using the platform.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really, truly appreciate your efforts on that, Ken. So what I'll do is just a quick 10-minute overview here. I'll spend about 5 minutes on some slides to help you to wrap your head around what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. And then what I want to do for the folks who are remaining on the phone call is to hop right into our sandbox to show of those in the administrative roles and especially the role of the parent, a little bit about the teacher too, but I'm going to really minimize this. So just a few slides here. We like to break it down into kind of 3 tiers of parents who are out there. And I've taught for 30 years and I've been in the trenches with so many of you, and I've seen these 3 tiers in live time. So those tier 1 parents are much like the people on this phone call today. We would stay engaged no matter what, the information. All parents want to remain engaged. Tier 2 parents, they're kind of those parents who will stay engaged if it's super easy. They're busy, they want to stay engaged, but they're going to miss some memos if we don't make it super easy for them. And those tier 3 parents, they're tougher to engage for lots of different reasons. They all love their kids, of course, but for those tier 3 parents, they struggle with various issues involving equity and et cetera. So we commit everything we have into reaching all parents, and that's really truly established by simplifying and unifying all communications. So the current ed tech landscape, many of you will agree, it can be really messy. There are a lot of great tools out there in and of themselves. Each one of them is pretty great, but the problem that we see, and really truly the main reason we're in business, is because they're kind of all over the place. I was on the phone with a superintendent this week who said that she had received a phone call from a parent and said, I have 3 kids and I am receiving information on my 3 kids every day from 22 different sources. And the superintendent said, we need help. We're failing and making it simple enough for the parents to current remote learning is tricky. It's uncharted waters. It's tough. Everyone's giving it everything they've got, but really the opportunity here is to simplify and unify. Again, parent challenge, they're getting information from all different resources exemplified on this slide. And really what we want to do is we want to make sure that we put everything in one location for all of the parents, including everything right now for remote learning. It's going to be the buzz for the next 6 months, year and a half. We just don't know. But we're really proud of the number of districts we're signing right now. And the main reason for that is the need to simplify. So how are we different? This is a fantastic slide. If you reach out to me, I'll share my contact information at the end. If you reach out to me at the end, I will be happy to provide this slide to you via email. Kind of exemplifies everything we do in one slide, or most everything we do. In fact, the platform is extraordinarily robust. We do a whole lot, but I believe the real magic sauce, as both a former educator of 30 years and as a parent, is that we simplify it all down and we make that end user experience for your teachers, for your parents, for the students themselves, let alone any admins who use the system as well. We make it easy. One of my favorite aspects of the platform is our live two-way language translation tool for teachers. Oftentimes that language translation is available for the superintendent level, perhaps even for the principals, but rarely does it filter down to the level of the teachers. And of course, the teachers are the front lines with the parents. So for equity in our education system, this lifetime language tool is superb. And if you reach out at schools@parentsquare.com, we will provide you with that slide. Or you can email me personally at valerie@parentsquare.com, and I will make sure that I get that to you. All right, for the next few minutes here, I want to get us into the sandbox, show you a couple of features, do a quick time check here. Okay, a couple of features that I think will resonate the most with the folks on this particular phone call. I'm seeing that we have some current customers, I'm seeing that we have some prospects, and I'm seeing we have some people who are just curious. So first and foremost, my very, very favorite part for educators, for parents, for admins and students is that for 13 years, first day of kindergarten, all the way through graduation, parents come to one unified platform, and this is what they see very literally. They see their children's names in the upper left here, and we keep it very familiar for end user experience, right? So each of the children will receive his or her own live feed, if you will. Anything that pertains to Christiana will be in her feed. Same thing for Benjamin and for Dane as well. So parents will receive information for no initial opt-in is getting an awful lot of credit because you're going to have instant gratification on improving parent engagement, because with no initial opt-in, they'll get those initial messages. It's when they want to respond to them that they're prompted to answer a couple of questions about when they want to receive information, how they want to receive information, and in what language they want to receive that information. Extremely important to some folks on this particular call are analytics. Really important to illustrate how this platform is being used. And I know that every state in the country has to report to the state education department how they're engaging parents. For some, it's more enforced than others, but every state has that report. I'm getting reports from some of my clients who are so pleased with our dashboard that they are actually using screenshots. They're cutting and pasting from our dashboard and putting it right into, for California, the LCAP report and various different reports that go throughout different states. It's different for Oregon, Washington, etc. I want to bring it right up to the district level here to show you some of our analytics at that level. So how the platform is being used This donut is very important. Doing a quick time check here. This donut is very important here. So when a message goes out, whether that's from a coach, a teacher, a bus that's running late, the superintendent, anyone can see in live time the level of efficacy of that delivery of that information. Far more importantly, though, in my opinion, is this little red part here that illustrates who did not get that information and how they did not get that information. So perhaps if there's an urgent alert, Valerie Wilson, the parent, me, I might receive that message via phone call, the robocall, and I also might receive it via text. So I'm in good shape. Maybe I didn't get it. That's going to be delineated right here on a live time report. You'll really be able to see how the schools are using the platform. Love board, really valuable tools here. And I'll wind it down and hope that you'll reach back if you have any questions at all. So you can see which languages folks are preferring to be reached in, which method of delivery parents are receiving information and preferring to be contacted in, how the platform is really being used, what is resonating the most with parents, what are they interacting with the most. Remember, this is an interactive platform, really increasing student engagement and parent engagement. We know if we really want to get through to someone and do a status check or a data check on whether or not they're processing the memo, we can figure that out based on if they've opened the email. We can see that in our reports here. If they've engaged with the RSVP, the parent-teacher signups for parent-teacher conferences, field trip, electronic e-signatures, etc. I like this last screen here, and then I'll wind it down. Really shows which schools are using the platform and how they're using it. Really nice customer service. We'll reach out and really re-engage a school district when one or two particular schools are not using the platform so much. We keep a pulse on that, and we'll reach back and say, hey, X, Y, and Z are using this platform so well within your district. Let's increase your numbers too. Let's do another little mini training or something to really help out. So I'm going to stop there. Lots more to the platform. I'd love more time with you if you're at all interested in learning more about the platform. But I really want to wind down with a couple of points that Ken made. So he started at the top of his presentation talking about experience comes from loopholes or making mistakes or shortcomings. I've learned a lot in my lifetime through some mistakes as well. What I'm really that a lot of school districts are learning in live time, where best intentions and best efforts have been made, there are some real loopholes in getting through to the parents successfully. So now is a great time where they're learning that and remedying that.